Laura Kuenssberg is stepping down as the political editor of the BBC, and I was thinking, who should replace her? I have a few people in mind.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. my dog would be a better political editor.
My great, he's quite vocal. He has opinions on food shortages and other pressing news items.
I've heard your dog's opinions on food shortages. They're like once every 2 hours.
He's also quite a reliable producer of green energy, which I know the BBC is fond of.
And I'm sure there's plenty of government ministers who are into the dogging business, so not naming names, but nevertheless, I'm sure there are. But no, there must be, I know a Conservative MP has already got in trouble for suggesting that the next political editor should be definitively and overtly pro-Brexit. Which annoyed all the right people, like David.
Was this not Thomas More?
Thomas, famous Conservative MP. Might be some of their opinions.
Was this Charles Moore?
No, because he's not an MP either. But
no, but he was. Oh no, he was pushed forward for the chairman of the BBC, wasn't he?
He was, and that was back when we were actually talking about interesting reform of the BBC. So yes. Charles Moore being the new chief executive or whatever the top position of the BBC is. Which would have really been interesting for the Boris government to do it. Tony Blair did this, and nobody complained at the time.
Well, he didn't install a Conservative. He means you don't.
No, he installed in the heads of all public bodies, quangos.
Which is what the left are good at.
Yeah, the Conservatives pretend to care about institutions, but the Labour Party is the one in recent history that's actually taken care of institutions.
Well, taking care of
it in the way that, like in the Sopranos sense, or the Godfather. I've taken care
palliative
of
care,
terminal care. But it would have been interesting for Boris to have actually gone with someone like Charles Moore, but he didn't. Typical Boris, he backed out. But no, there must be some interesting...
all the most interesting things he said he was going to do.
Yes, I mean, that would have been fascinating.
Get Brexit done.
Yeah, well, that's the only important thing, really. But
I'm not sure Brexit is relevant to the new political editor of the BBC, though. It's done and dusted. We want someone...
It's not done and dusted.
Well, it is, though, isn't it? The debate rages on because some lunatics can't accept that it's happened. But it has happened, and I think we ought to be selecting someone on slightly more of a basis than that.
No, I would agree with that. I don't think Brexit's done, but I also don't think it should be the basis for selecting the next political editor of the BBC. Also, though, I wouldn't necessarily have much of a problem if it were the basis for that selection, given that none of the people currently complaining about the Tory MP's proposal that it should be pro-Brexit complained when Tony Blair picked his preferred head for the BBC, or about the fact that the BBC was overtly and demonstrably, Civitas did a really good study on this, pro-EU for the last 30, 40, 50 years. Civitas' report showed that of all the guests, for instance, to appear on Question Time over the course of that 40, 50-year period, only 3% of them were pro leaving the European Union or anti-joining the European Union. That's actually increased even more markedly in recent times. The only time it was ever balanced was broadly during the Brexit referendum when it was constitutionally obliged to be. And it was telling that lots of Remainers saw balance as being bias against them, which is evidence not of bias against them, but of how biased it normally is in favour of them.
I would like to point out, though, just from following on from what you just said, that the BBC is constitutionally obliged to be balanced in everything it does, not just the Brexit referendum.
Yeah, but there are extra restrictions that come in place, though, in time of general elections and referendums like the Brexit one, for instance.
That's when they get their act together, is it?
Yeah, they are obliged, for instance, to seek 50-50 representation from the recognised bodies campaigning on either side during those periods of time. They're not equivalently obliged, I don't think, in the intervening periods about non-electoral issues. But no, there must be some good candidates for the next deputy editor.
Well, I've got one, Rod Liddle.
He would be fun. Yeah, he's got the insider knowledge.
Editor of Newsnight, was it? Not Newsnight.
No,
what was it called?
The Today programme.
The Today programme. Thank you. Yes, so he's got experience. He's knowledgeable. He's a lefty.
Yep.
Most people forget a socially conservative lefty, so just old school Labour essentially. Member of the SDP, so you're getting that sort of independent.
And he's not institutionalised.
He's not institutionalised. And he would probably encourage breaking the smoking ban on sets, which was a good thing. No, he'd be one candidate. Of course, he'd never get in because there'd be a massive public outcry of this and that ism and phobia. Rod Liddle, I suppose Charles Moore.
Andrew Neil, bring Andrew Neil back.
No, I've slightly gone off Andrew Neil.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a small C conservative, so I'm not particularly disposed to. Well, I'm far more disposed to them than I am to outright far left lunatics. But I'm not particularly disposed to just straight up sort of middle of the road, liberal, metropolitan, very much establishment figures like Andrew Neil.
Is Andrew Neil that though? He hasn't struck me as being particularly in favour of any of those things.
Well, no, of course he is. You only have to look at his conduct after he left GB News, or indeed why he left GB News. He didn't like the fact, in his words, it was becoming more populist. To paraphrase him, rather, it was becoming more populist. He didn't like the fact, in other words,
to use his actual phrase, it was becoming too much like Fox News.
Too much like Fox News, but of course it wasn't
peddling
actually...
in conspiracy theories and...
What conspiracy theory, I should like to know.
That's the question. Where has this happened?
Where are the conspiracy theories?
What
he didn't like was that people like Nigel Farage were coming on board, and he didn't like Dan Wootton. Nobody likes Dan Wootton, but that's not the point.
Dan Wootton is incredibly annoying. He also cited Patrick Christys, who is also irritating.
Very irritating.
Shock jock types, he called them.
Yeah, well, he's not wrong about that.
No, he's not wrong about that, but nevertheless, it's not evidence of peddling in conspiracy theories a la Fox News.
My point, though, being that he started GB News because he wanted a genuinely sort of... Well, I'm not sure he used this word.
He used anti-woke.
And I don't see how you can be anti-woke and not be, at some level, conservative, at least about that particular issue. So as GB News lived up to its premise and became more and more, conservative in a more or less small C fashion, he distanced himself from it and he quit.
He disappeared very early on. I know he's given his side of the story in his column in the Mail, which was an interesting read, but didn't quite, to my mind, add up. Not only from the absence of evidence of any peddling in conspiracy theory, it's also not especially shock jockish. It's got Dan Wootton, it's got Patrick Christys, who are shock jocks. I don't think Nigel Farage is a shock jock. You can see the similarity, but he's not. But other presenters, Mercy Muroki is not a shock jock by definition. Alistair Stewart, ITV's old news anchor, who's a very, very, very good at his job, not the guy they got from the BBC, quite dry-witted, whose name I don't recall. And Andrew... Who did Titania McGrath? Andrew...
Andrew...
I always forget his surname.
Our listeners are screaming his name out at us right now. Andrew... Titania McGrath.
Whoever did Titania McGrath. not Andrew Lawrence.
Not that one. No, that's the wrong one.
The laptop was up, I'd search him, but it's not. But anyway, Free Speech Nation, for instance, is a really good... And Neil Oliver as well. Neil Oliver is not a shock jock by any stretch of the imagination. And Andrew Neil's column on this read very much like... I don't want to use the cliche sour grapes, but nevertheless sour grapes is what it came across as. Largely just a contest over editorial control, which he thought he was owed and which he wasn't given. And he's completely right about the massive problems the channel had at the beginning, which should have been foreseen and should have been avoided and could have been avoided had they taken his advice. But nevertheless, it just didn't quite ring true. Okay, so I still think Andrew Neil, though, would be a good political editor of the BBC. Those issues wouldn't necessarily arise. And the political editor of the BBC is supposed to be quite rigorously impartial, and I think Andrew Neil is when he interviews people. And ideally should be a good interviewer, and Andrew Neil is a good interviewer when he's got the proper team behind him doing the research. So, I don't know, I still think he'd be quite a good... And also he knows his stuff. So...
Any other candidates?
Well... There are some, I'm sure that don't stand a chance of getting there, but might be good fun to have. What about... Anne Widdecombe? She would be great.
Oh, I don't know. Can the BBC sound studio handle an organ pipe on set?
Speaks in 4 different registers at once.
No.
She's qualified.
Well,
she's
qualified.
been on Strictly, so she's that's cultural. Nadine Dorries is currently our culture secretary on the strength of eating kangaroo anus and writing chick lit novels. So. And, Anne Widdecombe is...
2 qualifications I long never to have.
Despite being semi-Antipodean. Yeah.
I am half Australian, folks. Can't you tell?
Anne Widdecombe would be great. She has a strong sense of cultural values. She doesn't give a damn about other people's opinions of her. She probably doesn't very much like the BBC. And my long-term ambition, if I were to have my way, any person appointed to a public sector job would fundamentally oppose the existence of the job to which they've been appointed.
Like Ron Swanson.
Whom they modelled, because they went to the Senate and interviewed several different senators. And I suspect they interviewed Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He was a real-life human being, funnily enough, elected as a Tea Partier and subsequently institutionalised. But the person they interviewed, who they did not name, said, "I guess I fundamentally oppose the reason for my being here." And I think that is the proper attitude that every public sector appointee should take. So you want to appoint someone to the BBC who thinks the BBC should be abolished, for instance. And Anne Widdecombe would go some way toward that.
Okay, what about Peter Hitchens?
Yeah, if he would accept it. But you know what? Peter Hitchens is the ultimate black pill, though. I mean, if he were ever given power to effectuate what he wants to effectuate, would he actually take it, do you think?
I think he suspects himself.
Which is a wise and sensible
thing to do, yes. Well, full disclosure, listeners, we have met Peter Hitchens.
We've interviewed
Peter Hitchens, and he's actually a very nice man, much smaller than you would expect him to be.
Very much, yeah.
No less formidable and somewhat intimidating for it. Would he accept it? I don't know, but in some way that's irrelevant. He is impartial. He frequently expresses his support for the existence of trade unions, for instance. So
yeah, in some respects he calls himself a social democrat.
Yeah, he's happy calling himself a
whilst loathing the Social Democratic Party as it existed in the 1980s.
But, well, he has spoken with William Clouston.
The new Social Democratic Party.
Social Democrat, which I
well, they followed me on Twitter years ago. It was like being thrown back to 1984. Not the Orwell, but the real life version, which is worse.
Yes.
Shirley Williams. Rest her soul. Roy Jenkins. Williams.
Yes, she's dead now, isn't she?
Shirley Williams. Well, they both are.
Yeah, so we can't nominate her.
Along with
sadly.
social democracy. Peter Hitchens, what would he accomplish though as head of the BBC? I mean, fewer pro-abortion lines and call the midwife, presumably.
No. I don't think he would bother focusing on some of the things he knows would result in just depressing backlashes. I think, so for example, he frequently says, "I no longer bother talking about the issue of gay marriage or things like this because I just know that I'm going to be covered in slime." But what he would do is draw attention to a number of issues which we really ought to be talking about as a society.
Yeah.
For instance, marijuana and the fact that it is increasingly correlated to the brushing up against causation levels of correlation with violent crime and permanent mental health damage. Yeah. He'd be talking about these things, and they need talking about. He would also be no less hard on the Conservative Party because since 2010 he has repeatedly called for the destruction of the Conservative Party. So I think it'd be an interesting fish to have behind the desk at the BBC.
Who else? It would be interesting to see what would happen if you were. But in the interest of balance, or rather taking the BBC down the line it obviously wants to go down, but taking it to the fullest extent, which it still somehow feels bound to avoid. Owen Jones.
Good God.
Aaron Bustani.
Well, as long as he doesn't walk out of his own studio and he encounters an opinion he doesn't like.
He would. Mind you, it would be very difficult to see in some respects how Owen Jones heading the BBC would make any difference to the BBC. What would actually change? I mean, can you name anything? I'm struggling to think of anything the BBC currently reports on that would in any way be substantively altered by Owen Jones being in control of his political news agenda, for instance. The only thing I can think of is that the Stephen Nolan's Stonewall podcast wouldn't have been made at all. But otherwise, what would change? It's slightly alarming to think that Owen Jones being put in charge would make no difference.
Well, no, I think it would make a difference. For all my criticisms of the BBC, I think that really would push it over the edge. And if Owen, in our little theoretical game that we're playing, if Owen Jones were to become the political editor of the BBC, I think Boris Johnson would be almost committing a crime against humanity if he didn't at that point decriminalise the licence fee. No, Owen Jones would be disastrous, obviously. I mean, that he is the quintessential... Words escape me. I mean, it's the quintessential something or other, and it's disparaging. Whatever it is I'm thinking of,
what
it's
disparaging. What have his
disparaging.
fans called him? The
Wicked Woodland Sprite.
Wicked Woodland Sprite, Power Bottom Sex Dwarf, Fuckable Choir Boy. Dubious about the fuckable part of that, but nevertheless, Choir Boy.
But he's not a journalist, and I really wish
he's a YouTuber.
I really wish he would stop calling himself a journalist. You can't claim to be a journalist, which comes with that word has certain denotations. I'm sorry, but it does. One of which is a certain degree of impartiality and also an interest in the actual truth of the matter. You can't claim to be a journalist during, for instance, the leadership the prime ministerial campaign of Jeremy Corbyn during the general election.
Yeah, and appear on stage with Jeremy.
And appear on stage with him.
Yeah.
Clapping him and giving speeches at rallies, and also he's just so insufferable. Both of them, Jeremy Corbyn and Owen Jones.
Yes.
And every opportunity Owen Jones gets, when he's not trapped in his house in one of the lockdowns that he supports, he is out on the streets. Selfie. Is there a verb for or a noun for a selfie, but a video selfie?
Being a wanker.
Yeah, that'll do. Just filming himself in front of people he doesn't like, just cajoling them.
It's the certainty and the frivolity and the moral absolutism of some pubescent child. He is the definition of the permanent adolescent.
You've just reminded me of Dan Savage. Do you remember in the Festival of Dangerous Ideas in, I think it was Melbourne in Australia? It was in Australia. I don't know if it was Melbourne or not. I think it was. Funnily enough, Pete Hitchens was on the panel. Jermaine Greer, I think, was there, possibly.
Yes, Jermaine Greer was there.
Dan Savage was on there. And I'd never heard of Dan Savage before this, but he said in the midst of what was actually quite a serious debate about a number of serious issues, I give a really good blowjob in front of thousands of people and laughed about
all of
this.
Whom laughed like seagulls.
Not seeing the sort of the total inappropriateness of this.
Because it's the Ash Sarkar line. It fucks like a champion.
Yeah, it's just inappropriate. But of course, these people don't believe in making these sorts of moral distinctions between appropriate and inappropriate and
private and public.
Private and public and so
on.
The
socialists are famously hazy on the distinction between private and public anything.
So, no, Owen Jones would be catastrophic. In fact, to use his own language, I dare say it would whip up the worst left-wing sentiments. It would be a travesty, yes, against
erasing the
this and that right.
Yeah.
It would erase the existence of conservatives.
The conservatives don't exist, or rather, gay conservatives don't exist. Obviously, if they're conservative, they cannot be gay.
Yeah,
because only the LGBTIQ+2 movement actually stands for the gays. That could be a subject of a different video, but so I suppose much the same thing would apply to someone like Aaron Bastani or Ash Sarkar, equivalently.
At Novara Media.
Yeah, well, BBC takes many Novara Media lines. Polly Toynbee.
Oh, God, fuck off.
Again, I'm not sure what the difference would be. It's already sanctimonious and self-serving and patronising.
And what's interesting is that Jones... Well, I don't know about Jones, actually. I could be wrong about him, but maybe Jones, Toynbee, and also the Miliband's, if we can possibly remember them, they all have a sort of patrimony, if you will, or their fathers or grandfathers were all actually semi-serious political...
Well, Hilary Benn as well.
Hilary Benn, yes. Very disappointing in comparison with his father. Polly Toynbee would be disastrous. But then again, Polly Toynbee has read Peter Hitchens. She gave one of the sort of blurb puffs for the abolition of Britain back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And she said it was a bonkers book, her words, but that it was essential reading. So at least she actually read the thing. I don't envision Owen Jones reading The Abolition of Britain with any degree of scrutiny.
Or charity, at least.
Yes, yeah. Because charity is the thing here that we're talking about. To what extent are you willing to extend charity to people who disagree with you? Now, for all of our rhetoric in our little, in our podcast, for all of our sort of disparagement of the other side of the political aisle, I like to think we do actually attempt to give some degree of charity to people who disagree with us.
Yeah.
You do not see that coming from people like Owen Jones.
It's a disagreement over means, not over ends. And the problem with people like Owen Jones is that they think that by disagreeing with their means, you disagree with their ends. So conservatives, by virtue of not agreeing with socialism, are not just disagreeing with socialism, they're also disagreeing with the cause of equality, justice, human rights, etc. ad nauseum. And that is part of the reason political discourse in this country is completely screwed, which is that one side in particular, I think both sides do this to an extent, but one side in particular takes this incredibly moralistic attitude toward their opponents and toward politics in general, which is that if you disagree with means, you must disagree with ends. And by disagreeing with ends, you've revealed yourself to be unjust, intolerably prejudiced, horrible, bigoted people. Which is, again, a line that sometimes you do see come through at the BBC. But I think the answer to the question who should replace Laura Kuenssberg as political editor of the BBC is nobody. If you're to retain the BBC as any kind of state-funded broadcaster, it ought to be run along the lines of C-SPAN in the United States. And Brian Lamb, who founded C-SPAN, is the first presenter of C-SPAN, would fire anyone who editorialised anything. No presenter on C-SPAN was allowed to give an opinion on anything. You just asked questions of your guests, and that was it. The guests gave the opinions, you kept it silent. There was no room for an editorialising department within C-SPAN. There's no reason to have a political editor at the BBC, or an LGBT editor at the BBC, or home affairs editor at the BBC. There's no... Why would you have this? By definition, editors are giving opinions.
Because not to have these positions is to be in direct conflict with the charter that Lord Reith set up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, but it just is.
Educate and entertain.
Yeah. But it goes beyond that. I mean, the charter that exists, the constitutional arrangement that exists between the BBC and the government is that they will not editorialise in this manner.
Yeah. But they do, and pay people lots and lots of money to do so.
Yes.
So no one should replace Laura Kuenssberg. Yeah, but the solution, if you're not going to abolish the BBC, which would be the total solution, which
final solution,
the final
one might
solution.
say.
If you're not going to abolish it, at least do away with this whole class of editors that it employs to tell the public what to think about issues. So yeah, no one should replace Laura Kuenssberg, but if it must be someone, I'm Widdecombe.
Mm-hmm.